This is the OMG Book Show with William O'Day, episode number 15.
Welcome to the OMG Book Show, where it's all about taking you into the brains of fantastic authors. No scalpels required. It's more than an interview, it's an experience. And now, your host, William O'Day.
Fiends, Romulans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar salad, not to grow it. So that was my take on that famous speech. Was it a real speech? I don't even remember. I think it was from Brutus. Et tu, Brute, that guy? I think it was him. Anyway, this has nothing to do with the show today. It was just a fun little thing that occurred to me right before I hit record. So there it is now, recorded forevermore in the journals, in the annals of... there's something, let me just bring it up and just say it right now. There is something that strikes me as not inappropriate, is not the correct, is not quite right the correct word there, but just something off-putting about the word annals as, like recorded histories or, that kind of thing. It just feels like maybe there could be another word that meant the same thing that didn't have the same associations. I'm just saying it's just an idea. Let's look into it. We'll talk to Webster. Anyway, moving on. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for joining me. We have the distinct pleasure and honor, and I say that, I think, sometimes before, and I always mean it, and I mean it this time too. It is a really big honor to get to chat with our guest today. JT Sawyer is his name. It's actually his pen name. His real name is Tony Nestor, and he is a living legend in the survival skills community. We go into it more in the show today in the interview, but I have had the pleasure of attending one of his courses out by Flagstaff, Arizona, and it was an absolute blast. A weekend of great learning and good fun, and I ended up going with a friend, Jason, who lives in Sedona, and we both just couldn't have had a better time and just spoke about wanting to go back immediately, and then, of course, life happened, and that was something like 3 or 4 years ago. And during that weekend, I ended up carving a spoon out of wood because we would sit by the campfire and Tony would tell stories and it was just a lot of fun. But I ended up carving a spoon, very intricate. In fact, I think, and I'm proudly going to claim it here, Tony called me the Spoon Master. Hello, I need to get a t-shirt printed up and wear it around. I'm so proud. Anyway, I made this super cool spoon. I had such a great time just, carving it out of wood, that I use it every day. In fact, I used it this morning to prepare mac and cheese and kale, etc. for my girls. I'm going to actually take a picture of it and put it in the show notes so you can see it. The proof is in the pictures. Anyway, I digress. Clearly, I'm not an aggressor. I'm a digressor. That's what I do. It's my nature. But back to Tony Nestor. He is a man with an amazing, what's the word I'm looking for? Body of experience in the survival field, in survival skills, in traditional, these are the kind of skills that go back tens of thousands of years. I don't know, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. Just like simple things, creating usable tools, objects with our hands, that kind of thing. Really, it's amazing. He makes his living teaching, now he's getting into being a fiction writer as well, but in the past, he's made his living teaching survival courses for the military special operations community, Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Marshals, a number of other federal agencies that he's done over the last 25 years or so. And he has also been a consultant for the film Into the Wild with the starring Emile Hirsch as Christopher McCandless, and that was based on a true story, and we talk a little bit about that in the interview. It's a great interview. Tony is such an amazing storyteller. I've had the pleasure of hearing his storytelling firsthand under a makeshift shelter during a torrential rainstorm, and then lately I've been getting into his Emergence series as well, and those are just as entertaining. So it's a great interview. No more needs to be said about that. Let's jump into it. Surgical gloves on, scalpel in hand. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show today. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of bringing to you an author that I was, unbeknownst to me, I was familiar with in another context. His name is JT Sawyer, and he's on the line with us. JT, thank you so much for joining us today.
William, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Right on. And I think beforehand we had cleared it that it's okay that we connect your real name to JT Sawyer, which is a pen name that you write under. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are speaking with Tony Nestor, which you may or may not be familiar with, but anybody probably in the who has anything at all, any kind of interest in the survival field or genre and outside of fiction, but I'm talking about actual like courses and skills and learning things of that nature, has probably heard of this guy. He's a legend in the field. And so that's one of the many reasons I'm super excited to be able to bring you on the show today. Thank you. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited.
All right. So to get a little bit of, we were just talking about it before we started recording. I actually had the pleasure of attending one of Tony's classes out, I believe it was outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. Is that right?
That's right. High desert, about a half hour north. About 6,500 foot elevations where our camp's at.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful, beautiful location. There's an aspect of it being remote, but I think we maybe just drove a couple of hours, if I remember.
Yeah, and whenever we get down that road where our camp's at, people, even though we're not far from Flagstaff, people are like, where did this guy just take us?
Yeah, it feels like a more scenic version of the moon in some ways. Well, I had the pleasure of attending, I think it was a 3-day knife-only course, which at least he offered at that time. Do you still offer that course?
You know, we do, but I'm doing more of those for the military and for private groups where I'm kind of transitioning into doing writing more full time and fewer survival courses so I can be at home with my family.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, then it seems to me like then I'm going to have to make sure and try to sign up for something before you completely retire from the outdoor teaching gig. Is that coming up?
No, I'll probably be teaching until I drop. I just like being outdoors and doing trips with folks, but I'm just kind of trimming back because for a long time I was averaging about 250 days a year sleeping out on the ground and guiding trips and wow. Gone for 2/3 of the year, and so now I'm a little more balanced in my life and at home here.
Right. And how did obviously you must have a good understanding and relationship with your wife because she was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll see you that 1/3 of the year, or did she go sometimes?
We met doing this. We met years ago working with adjudicated youth and wilderness programs and taking kids in the outdoors. So she kind of knows. So when I come back from a trip and we talk about how the course went or the weather or group dynamics or, the skills, doing primitive fire or foraging, she's like, oh, yeah, okay. And so she knows.
Oh, that's good. That's key because on the other end of the spectrum, if I go away for a weekend and then I return on Sunday night, I was like, you were gone a really long time. Can we never do that again? And I'm like, hey, everybody needs a little time away. In fact, that was partly, Jason, a friend of mine that lives in Sedona. We went to your course. I can't remember. It was a few years ago now. But man, what a wonderful weekend away. And one of the things, and I know this isn't related to the books, but we'll get to that. Cause right now, ladies and gentlemen, we're embracing all that Tony Nestor is. And he is, an author for sure. And that's kind of what brought him to my attention recently. But obviously so much more than that. Anyway, so one of the things that I loved about your course and immediately kind of drew me in, about you as an individual was that you don't come across as like a Gatling gun wielding, ninja spec ops badass, and there's kind of, that's one kind of archetype in the survival industry. And for me, and I like that in my fiction, but for me personally, it's hard to connect to on an individual level. And I know a lot of people do, but you come across to me, at least, in my experience with you, as someone who is very grounded in practical ways that humans have been getting by in this environment for millennia. What brought you into the direction of having this interest?
Well, first off, thank you. It's always a pleasure just being out around the campfire and telling stories and sharing skills. And I remember on the course we just had lots of torrential rain and did lots of storytelling around the fire that night.
Yes. And it was awesome. It was totally awesome.
But, I had always just been interested in the old skills from when I was little. And I grew up in the Great Lakes area in Michigan and had a very good introduction to the outdoors and traditional camping from the Boy Scouts. So I was in that for 3 years, and that just kind of laid the foundation. And then after high school, I tried going to college for a little while, but I just didn't want to be indoors. And it didn't help that I was reading Thoreau and Emerson at the time. And so I took off and spent about 4 years living in the outdoors, working youth rehab programs and therapeutic programs for kids. And this is where we would kind of take people out for a month at a time with just a knife and blanket and cooking pot and a handful of rice and lentils. And then we would fish and forage and hunt and make fire by friction and make shelters every night. And that really just gave me a good introduction to the old skills. And the thing that I just like the most, that I've always enjoyed, is going out without a lot of gear and interacting with the landscape and making things with your hands and working in a small group like humans have always done, working around the campfire, making the items you need from your environment to take care of yourself. So that was always a real joy and a real interest of mine. And then I just kind of got into teaching shortly after that. I started running some courses, started my company in 1989, teaching outdoor skills, and just been at it ever since.
And the company you're referring to, Ancient Pathways, is that right?
That's right. Yep. That's our survival school / bushcraft school here in Flagstaff.
Yeah, and it's I'm not totally conversant with all of the different schools that are out there, so I've been to a couple of them just for interest, but I have to say the experience that I had out there was just absolutely fantastic. Lots of practical skills, and there was another gentleman, I think maybe his name was Mike something, and he brought kind of the herbalist kind of local vegetation and what could be done with that angle.
Yeah, that's my head instructor, Mike Masick, and he's kind of the local, the edible medicinal plants guru of the Four Corners area. So it's always a real pleasure to have him on any of our courses.
Right on. Yeah, he was lots of fun to interact with and learn from as well. One of the things you'd mentioned, did we stay out there? Is it generally 2 nights or 1 night? It's been a while now, and I've forgotten.
No, I run different courses. So I know sometimes we do the 2 night, 3 days. Sometimes it's 4 nights and 5 days. I think on that one, it was just the weekend. Yeah, the weekend course we did. Okay.
Yeah. So we, and as the general overview, everyone, so I live in Sonoma County now, which, cause I'm a softie, right? This is wine country. There's not a lot of immediate survival going on. Actually, there is in different places, but especially with the fires that rolled through here recently, but it was nice to get out for a weekend at least. The way I look at that course is it's kind of like a little introductory taste of what you could do beyond that. Is that how you frame it or no?
Yeah, and that course in particular is just really designed to show people what to do if they get lost in the backcountry or stranded overnight. And it's an emergency situation. So how do you get through a life-threatening predicament if you break down or you're stuck there because of the weather or an injury? So short-term survival, how do you take care of shelter, water, fire? How do you signal searchers? Just the basics. And then from there, if people want to pursue the area that I call bushcraft further, that's more of the old skills. How do I forage for plants and fish and make shelters and track and do celestial navigation and make pottery and bows and arrows, and the skills our ancestors were good at. And those aren't so much focused on survival as they are on living and interacting with the landscape and having that connection that we've always had with the environment. So a little different angle on survival, which is, I'm in trouble. Sun's going down in half an hour. I need to do something or I'm going to die. So right. A little different angle than bushcraft.
Right. And I think you had mentioned, and maybe as following as part of that, is there had been someone that just left the weekend. I believe it was the weekend before we arrived. And I think maybe he was pursuing that kind of learning out there. Because I think you had said he had lived for maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was 2 or 3 months. And I remember actually finding his little, I think it was you call it a wiki up shelter out there. And he had it dialed out with shelves everywhere and nice padded little bed area.
He had a luxury condo there made of bark. But, right. Yeah, that was our 9-week program. We used to run programs that were college accredited and all that, but mostly people just took it for the experience. And we'd be living out in the field for a couple of months with students, making all our own, bows and arrows and buckskin and sandals, and then going out on walkabouts in the mountains or the desert. And we'd spend time up at Hopi and on the Navajo reservation, learning the skills in context with the cultures who still use them. And so it was it was kind of this immersion program in the Southwest traditional skills. And that one was 9 weeks, and then we kind of trimmed it to 5 weeks. And I really like those long programs. They take you to a place that you can't get to in just a short period of time.
Right. You mean as obviously with the learning, but then also kind of the mental shift in perspective? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. The mental and just being out that long, you kind of form this small tribe of people and working together, and the resources. When you're laying in your shelter at night and you hear noise outside, you know what it is because you've lived out there for a while. It's like, oh, that's a coyote, or that's my neighbor who's going back to his shelter, or that's a squirrel. And just this intimacy with your surroundings that you don't get camping in a place for a few nights. And then just the connection to the ancient cultures of the area and the modern day cultures. There's so much here in Arizona in terms of prehistory and indigenous peoples. It's just a great place to be teaching these skills.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So I'm assuming then you're saying once you have been out there for a number of days and acclimated, because I think for most people, including myself, I have remember from various past experiences, is you're sleeping at night in a tent or sleeping bag or whatever, you hear a noise somewhere nearby, and automatically your mind, at least to someone with my limited experience, amplifies the source of that sound, the mass of it, by at least 10 times. It could be like a mouse through leaves, but you're like, I think that's a cougar.
Yeah, all of a sudden that beetle crawling around on the ground becomes a bobcat in your mind, and your mind starts working against you, and then you're halfway through the night and you realize you haven't slept a wink because your adrenaline's going.
Right.
After a night or two, we usually find it takes about 2 or 3 nights, and then people are settling in. They're leaving this frenetic pace from the city that they came with. They're leaving that behind and kind of settling into a different rhythm. And you can see it in the way people move and the way they talk and the way they are carving when they're working on the skills around the fire. There's just a different, slower, easier pace that people have compared to the place they just came from. And I always tell people after a course, you're going to be re-entering society now. So know that people are going to be talking fast, moving fast, driving fast, and it's going to take you a little while to integrate into that rush hour traffic back in Phoenix or LA.
Yeah, there is an element of recompression there, right? Yeah, and speaking of whittling around the fire, you had mentioned that one of the nights we were there was just a massive, beautiful massive thunderstorm, and we all got to sit around underneath a primitive shelter, and you were telling stories. I think I remember, man, if I get this right, I feel like I should get an A+. Was a lot of the stories about a guy named Al Seaver, something like that?
Yeah, Al Seaver, one of my heroes. He was the
Seaver. Yeah, okay.
He was the civilian chief of scouts for the U.S. Army at the time during the Geronimo campaign, during the Apache campaign in the 1870s and 1880s. And he's a very instrumental figure in the opening or closing of the American Southwest, depending on your perspective. But he was just this master of bushcraft and tracking, and he knew the landscape like few others. And so he's a pivotal figure in my story and retelling about the Geronimo campaign and what went on out here. Because that was just, we can drive a half hour south and be in that country. So we're in this land of many stories.
Right. And there was, you told quite a few different angles about his exploits and things that he'd done, but 2 that stick out in my mind, and let me know if I remember this right, because they were just like details that burned into my brain here. One was that at some point, or maybe he did this frequently, he'd been out for so long on the trail and never changed clothes, never bathed, was like too intent on carrying out the mission or whatever to think about that stuff, that he comes back into town and his denim or whatever it is, canvas pants maybe, are attached to his body because the hairs had grown through the fabric. Is that right?
You hear this with the Shackleton expedition as well. People just who had been living in their garments and clothing for so long became like a second skin. And I had heard that from a historian down south near Tucson several years ago, and he was just talking about this time when Al and his other scouts had come off a long pursuit of Geronimo. Their horses died in the Sonoran Desert in July, and they had to walk on foot, sleep by day, move at night. And by the time they got back, from what I was told, by the time they got back to Arizona, which was 6 weeks later or maybe more,
well,
he had hair growing out of his T-shirt and his jeans and all this, and had to soak in a bathtub to get it off. Now that could have been an exaggeration, but I don't know. I've read that with other cases, other explorers, people living in their clothes for a long period of time, and it just becomes that second layer of epidermis, and the things we don't think about when we go on a 3-day backpacking trip, and we can shower a couple days later.
Right. Yeah. And modern technology has come up with such fascinating things as a Nair or like 9-blade razors or something. And really, you just need to hang out in your clothes for like 2 months and then rip your clothes off and you'll be as hairless as a baby.
That'll do it.
Well, I made a little note here. I wanted to go back. You had mentioned you were in the Boy Scouts way back when. Did you achieve the legendary Eagle Scout status?
I sure did. Our scout troop broke apart after 3 years, and everybody kind of went their own way. And I kind of regret that it didn't get to that point. But after that, the stuff we were doing had so whet my appetite for being in the outdoors, and the skills we learned. The guys who are our scoutmasters were just these crusty old woodsmen and hunters, and they were like, "Boys, we're going out this weekend. I don't care if there's a blizzard." And we were out in all manner of weather. And back then, they used to encourage us to bring our 22s and our fishing poles. And anyway, it was fun, and I really whet my appetite for these older skills of how to go and kind of cut that umbilical cord back to society and live out there and make things from your landscape and take care of yourself. And anyway, that kind of lit a fire in me, and I just never stopped at that point.
Yeah, I, at least in a small part, can totally commiserate with that pride of production. In the time that we were out there, I probably became unreasonably proud of a little spoon with the little corkscrew handle that I made while we were all hanging out under the shelter there. And to this day, it's still in the kitchen being used. And every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, that was such a fun weekend. There it is.
Yeah, I remember you were the spoon master, and I remember you commenting on making that because you're like, it's so nice to be doing something real.
Totally. Yeah. And I worked, I guess writing books is also kind of a mental esoteric sort of pursuit. But before this, my career was in doing visual effects for big Hollywood movies. And maybe that's even one step removed into kind of mental Ethereum. And so, yeah, for me personally, at least, being out there and with hands and, a spoon knife, I think it's called, and one of the Mora knives, just making something real was like, man, I totally identify with what you're talking about there.
Yeah, there's a pleasure in just making something simple and carving things from your surroundings. But what's funny is I bring home spoons that I make on courses, and I just enjoy doing that, spoons and bowls and cups. And I'll bring those home now, and my wife's like, just throw it in the drawer with the rest of them.
You have way too many, I guess, high inventory. See, because I came back, I've made, I think, 2 more since then. But yes, it's almost the same kind of thing as what we're talking about. I came back and was like, oh, let's get rid of all the metal silverware. I want to make, all of this. And then life happens. And yeah. I don't think I carved another one until we went camping maybe the next summer for 4 or 5 days and ended up making a bigger one, because that was another thing. I realized as much as I enjoyed carving that knife out there that weekend, and it was totally worth it, just the activity itself, but then coming back and putting the form to functional use, I realized it's exactly too big and unwieldy to be like a cereal spoon, and exactly too small and unwieldy to be like a soup ladle spoon.
Yeah. That's about 2 Cheerios,
Yeah, exactly. So then so next time I'm not just going to go for how it looks, because it should function also.
Yeah. And that's where I'm at. I tend to make, none of my stuff will end up in a museum. I just want to get the job done and have that food paddle or that spoon so I can eat.
Right on. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll continue to touch on your experience as a survival instructor because, one, I find it fascinating, and two, it's a big part of your life. But let's jump over to the book writing side. And even way back when, I can't remember, like I said, 5 years ago, whenever it was, I recall buying, I think it was a nonfiction book that you'd written. Maybe just, was it called like Basics of Survival in the High Desert, something like that?
Yeah, there's Desert Survival Tips, Tricks, and Skills that just focuses on arid regions. And I first started self-publishing books back in 2000, just nonfiction books on survival, and that one came out. That one came out I think around 2002, and I've just updated that one recently, actually.
Very cool. And then how did you? Because it wasn't. I mean, I wasn't doing it at that time, but I imagine it was not easy to do the self-publishing route before Amazon set up this nice platform for all of us to use. How were you doing it way back when?
When I started, it was just in print, and I was the distributor and everything else and handled all the fulfillment and orders. Eventually got hooked up to a few distributors who got them in the bookstores and gear shops and National Park Service and that kind of thing. But largely, it was pretty primitive. I just would send off a Microsoft Word printout with 3x5 glossy pictures glued in place, send that off the printer and tell them what I wanted, and then they'd create the book. And then everything got digitized and changed overnight, the way we now do things. So it sure is a lot easier. But I had this huge inventory of these nonfiction survival books, and Bushcraft books all over the place, occupying like a third of the house. And so now the print on demand has changed that. And it's kind of funny. I have a book called When the Grid Goes Down on home self-reliance and how to cope with disasters. And the Kindle version of that one outsells the print version, which is just kind of ironic because it's about when the power goes out and you're without anything. So.
Right. You just have to read everything as fast as possible before your battery runs out.
Get an extra charger for your Kindle.
Yeah. Or the little solar chargers. I guess that would work for a little while. But I agree. Having the paper format of especially a book like that seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And frankly, I like that myself. I just like the feel of a book, and it's kind of weird, but the smell of a bookstore and the libraries and holding the book in my hand. And I have a Kindle, but I still read more print books than anything else.
Do you, when you're out on a longer than, a day or two kind of walkabout, do you take any sort of entertainment like that, or is it more all about leaving that behind?
It kind of depends. I do a personal walkabout once a year. Sometimes it's just by myself. Sometimes it's with some of my friends or colleagues or even my kids. But most of the time we're trying to get away from that and leave that behind. I might bring a book of, something relevant to what we're doing, like Whitman or Thoreau or something along those lines. But most of the time I'm just out to be out and extend my senses into the landscape and work with my hands and make things. And on courses that we do, there just isn't time. I'm the last one to go to sleep and the first one up in the morning. And so there's just so much to take care of in terms of teaching and prep and meals and watching out for people's safety and the weather. And I don't have much time to read on those particular courses.
Right. And it just sparked a memory of that weekend that we had. So that we were talking about, if it's a beetle clomping around in leaves, that for the inexperienced like myself and probably many that come out to take those courses, it amplifies in your mind. However, there are actually larger things out there. And in one of the days, I think maybe it was the last day, we had a group of maybe 10 or 12 or so. And it seemed like, if I remember right, it was about 50-50 male, female, a good mix of people. And, but we heard a girl, one of the girls there shout out. I can't remember her name. It's been a while, but anyway, she just super shout like, "Wah!" And Jason and I run over to her little shelter area. I'm like, "What's going on? What happened? What is it?" And I think it was are there bull snakes out there? Is that right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Bull snakes and the rattlesnakes. And I'm always fine when somebody has an encounter with a bull snake. Thank heavens that happens more than rattlesnakes. But that time of year and in the high desert, any rock, any fallen logs is going to have the potential for rattlesnakes or scorpions. So it's always something you're on the lookout for.
Yeah. So fortunately for all of us, it was a sizable bull snake, if I remember right, thick as my wrist, maybe 6 feet long or so. And, it had come out kind of a little bit away from her shelter. And then we got over there and she was like, can you get it away? And of course we were really not good with directing snakes. I mean, I don't know if anybody is, but we tried to scare it off in another direction and it headed straight back into her shelter to bed down for the day, I guess.
Good thing she didn't stay for a 7-day course. So she'd be building a new shelter.
I know, right? I think she did mention something like, I am not staying in there tonight. I can't remember if it was the last day or not.
Yeah, people always enjoy the talk at night around the campfire just before they go back to their shelter about creepy crawlies and scorpions and snakes. And I'll usually have people saying the next morning, it's like, dude, why couldn't you tell that story like at breakfast instead of last night? I didn't sleep at all.
Yeah, that's half the fun, right? So speaking of that, have you ever had someone come out there, like super gung-ho, excited to do it, and then meet some challenge or some psychological barrier and then just be like, oh no, I'm done, and then just pack up and leave?
We've had, let me think, we've had a couple of cases with minor stuff, mostly because like somebody had something going on back home with their family or a loved one and they were worried about it and wanted to get back to them. But right. I did do a course many years ago. I just left the Forest Service. I was working for them here in Arizona, and I started up teaching full time and guiding trips. And I had this little article in Backpacker magazine come out. This is like 20 years ago. And so a gentleman wanted to take a 5-day walkabout, one-on-one. He signed up and came out, and we went down the desert, a knife and blanket, cooking pot, rice and lentils, not a whole lot. So after that first night of sleeping out, the next morning, he was up before me, and he's kind of a few feet away from me looking down over the creek. And I didn't sleep well because this gentleman had inadvertently spilled our little pot of rice and lentils and wild onions all over our bedrolls the night before.
Oh, so no.
we had every rat and lizard and mouse in Arizona crawling over us and running through our hair, and it was just, I didn't sleep. Right. So anyway, I propped myself up on one elbow, and this guy Carl was looking down over the creek. And I always like to ask people, how'd you sleep? What would you do differently? How would you fix up your shelter tonight? And so I said, Carl, how'd you sleep? And he turned around and he had this really solemn look on his face. And he goes, not too well. I had this dream that I stabbed you to death and threw your body in the river.
Oh, man. That's an odd dream to have.
And I was like, what? It was like the Stanley Kubrick moment of the zoom lens going in on my face. I just never felt that alone in my life. And
is that when you said, okay, Carl, for you, it's a not even a knife course weekend?
And he's wearing a more knife around his neck that I'd given him. And then I was thinking, how long has he been standing there looking at me sleep when he's having these thoughts?
Oh,
didn't say anything. He goes, I think there's some bad juju in this canyon. We need to leave. And I was like, cool, let's pack up. We're out of here. And we ended up, leaving, and I kept him 5 feet in front of me on the hike back. And anyway, so that was the most bizarre thing I've ever had happen as a guide in the backcountry. But, most of the people who sign up for our courses kind of get a feel for what we're about and our approach and teaching philosophy by our website and through phone calls and on the longer courses we try and really I try and get a real feel for who's coming and what the dynamics are going to be like ahead of time. So try and avoid some of those other unpleasant situations.
Right. It almost sounds like you're like kind of producing a show like a reality TV show, except you're going, or they go in the opposite direction where they're trying to find the most neurotic combination of people for entertainment value,
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like something that would be good to shoot for with a group of people in the outback.
Yeah, maybe for the first day. And then after that would get kind of old. So,
right.
We tend to have a good blend of folks come on courses who are really interested in being around other like-minded people. And again, just working out on the land with their hands.
Yeah. And you had mentioned the website. I was looking at it last night, and I saw one of the, maybe it was the most recent or a recent blog post, and it was called Survival Fit ? And the gist of it was Like, how is your personal fitness level? And that really struck a chord with me because in the survival industry or field or whatever, there does seem to be so much emphasis on the cool tech and gear and this awesome gun or whatever that will help you survive the end all be all. But I found your article to be really informative and like, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like profound, because all of that other gear doesn't mean a whole lot if you can't run like one block without passing out.
Right. And I was kind of angling that article towards more of the urban survival crowd. I teach some one-day classes throughout the country, just in basic self-reliance. It's not a end of the world, doom and gloom kind of thing like my book or fiction books. But this one is just how to be self-reliant and take care of yourself. And we talk about this overlooked aspect of being fit, being able to take care of yourself, because survival is hard enough when the infrastructure around you is down, or whether it's urban or wilderness. I mean, survival is not romantic, it's not fun, and it's only adventure in retrospect. So you're going to be in a very grueling, life-threatening situation, maybe taking care of your loved ones around you and anyone else who happens to join in with your group, or your family members and so on. And so the more fit you are, the better you're going to be able to handle not only that physical stress, but the mental taxation that's going on in that crisis. And it's just, like you said, it's often an overlooked area because people talk about the firearms and the bug-out bags and the water filters. But if you're not able to take care of yourself physically and your ticker's not working too well because you haven't, gone on a walk recently or kept fit, then all that stuff, all that hardware is not, that's only one part of it. It's not going to help that much if you can't be around to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good reminder to me because I have, I do the, Tony Horton's P90X3 workout, generally, and really enjoy it. It's kind of, heavy on the core stuff, and there's different like flexibility versus strength versus, cardiovascular aspects to it. But I have fallen off the wagon a little too much lately. So I was like, all right, I need to get back on that.
Yeah, I always tell people just coming up with some kind of fitness program, whatever it is for you, whether it's aerobics or riding a bike or walking your dogs a couple miles every day. That's mostly what I do these days, going out for walks and whatever it is, just some means of staying fit, and this is all borne out in the archaeological record and in our prehistory. We wouldn't be here today if our ancestors were not fit.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things, getting back to the writing side of it. So you've done quite a few nonfiction books, from what I was able to tell on Amazon. What got you interested in making that? Because it's a pretty big leap going from kind of an informative sort of teaching aspect to, a more wild fiction-based entertaining aspect. What fired that for you?
Excuse me. I'd always been interested in storytelling from when I was little, and I always just enjoyed hearing a good campfire tale, and I incorporated that into my own programs when I started teaching outdoor courses and guiding professionally. And so it was just kind of an extension of that. I actually looked into what's involved with becoming a professional storyteller and doing the storytelling circuit for a while. And
that's cool.
So, I had been writing nonfiction since about 2000 and had done some freelance magazine writing prior to that. And then in 2014, I started tackling the fiction area. And I had this story floating around in my head for several years, from leading trips and doing these long drives, especially through Eastern California. I used to teach out at Joshua Tree for years, teach desert survival out there. And on the drive back to Arizona, driving through that moonscape out there in Eastern California and parts of Arizona, I just would think, what would happen if there was some type of crisis or post-apocalyptic type scenario where I don't have my vehicle and I'm on foot? How would I get back to my family? And it just always, I kind of grew up reading the Odyssey, and that was always one of my favorite stories about Ulysses trying to get back home to his family. So it's always been a theme in my books. and something in my own life. It's like maybe because I was gone so much on the trail. It's like, what do I do to get back home? And what if this happened? So I had these stories floating around in my head. And then on the summer of 2014, kind of two things happened. I was laid up with a little bit of a heel injury for a while. And so I started just writing down some story ideas. And then my kids and I got into watching the show Lost. And I had seen that years ago, but then they got into it and we started watching again. It just started giving me some ideas on character development and storylines. And I thought, I'm just going to start putting this story together. And that was my book, First Wave, which is a post-apocalyptic book, a lot of which takes place in Arizona. And it just kind of went from there. And then, friends of mine guide Colorado River trips in the Grand Canyon. And we've all had this experience where, as guides, you're out for a couple weeks at a time, and something can happen in the world, and you don't know about it until you come back 2 or 3 weeks later. And one of my friends had that happen a couple of times with 9/11. She's down in the canyon there with her clients, and myself happened where I was gone for a couple of weeks during the whole Katrina event that happened in the country or in the Southeast. And I came back and I had no idea that any of this had unfolded. And so that formed the crux of the main character in that book, who comes off of a 22-day Colorado River trip, and the world has unraveled from this pandemic, and they just have no idea. And now they have to survive on foot and make their way back home because there's nobody there to pick them up. So, just that's kind of how the fiction area took off, and just been at it ever since. I just enjoy that post-apoc world.
Yeah, I do too. I enjoy reading it and writing it as well. And how many, I wasn't able to count, but I feel like there was maybe 2 pages worth. How many books on the fiction side have you been able to put out thus far?
So I just finished my 19th fiction book, and about 2/3 of those are in the post-apoc genre with 3 different series. The Emergence series is the latest one. And then I have a straight thriller series that just focuses on a FBI man tracker, former combat tracker, and that one has a lot of bushcraft and fieldcraft skills in it, and that one's just straight thriller, no zombies.
All right, so I like the zombies, but I think thriller just generally is where I like to fall. So I'll probably end up getting to those at some point. Going to the Emergence series, that's you said was your latest one. What sparked the idea for setting that particular kind of version of what makes a human zombie like?
I had written a couple of post-apoc zombie books already, and I knew I wanted to get back into that genre after my thriller series. And so I thought, I just don't want to do the mindless, rotting creatures, Walking Dead style again. But how can I mix things up a little bit to make it fun for readers and add a different angle in? And so I just started researching different things. And at the time, I was watching this show on TNT, The Last Ship, which deals just with a virus, not zombies or anything like that, just a global pandemic. And it was so well done in terms of the science and the logistics of what was unfolding around the world that I thought, this is along the lines of what I want to do. And then I just had the good fortune of having met a lot of cool folks like yourself over the years on field courses and calling up a few people who had worked in CDC or even with the Ebola virus over in Africa. Actually, that gentleman lives just down the road from us. And so I kind of got together with people for lunch and said, hey, can I just pick your brain a little bit on what goes on in the day in the life of an Ebola researcher or doctor operating in a third world country during a pandemic. And
okay.
I got a lot of information and feedback and kind of the logistics of what goes on with those folks and incorporated that into the book. But the Emergence series, I just wanted to do something different. And so this one, the creatures in there have more of that hive mind, and it's a little different take on the usual zombie genre.
Yeah, I feel like I've spoken to a number of authors that are doing quite well in the zombie genre on the show, and even Sean Chesser, another guy that another author I've interviewed, he was steadfast for, I think, like 12, 13, 14 books, sticking to the George Romero shambling, moaning zombie archetype. But even he, who I think has been kind of the last stalwart of that traditional zombie, has moved into super fast, strong zombies, just because I think it's kind of like you're saying, he just wants to try something different, bring a little bit different angle to a very well-established genre at this point.
Yeah. And there's just there's so many different takes you can integrate into the genre itself. And I was kind of in the same boat as what you're describing. I had just done a number of series. It's like, okay, let's branch out a little bit here.
Well, what I think I saw on Amazon that the third book is yet to be released. Are you writing that or in process on that now?
That one is done. It's going back to the editor for one last look next week, actually, and then it'll be out in mid-February. And then I'm mostly tackling book 4 right now in that series, which will be out mid-spring. And pretty much 2018 is just focusing on the Emergence series and then writing one other nonfiction book on survival skills.
Yeah, that's super cool. So you mentioned it earlier in the show. You're looking to, over time, build this aspect up and wind down the survival teaching? Is that what's going on?
Well, I'd sure like a little more balance. So, I'm in my 50s now, and sleeping on the dirt and in caves just ain't what it used to be when I was in my 20s. So
right.
I'm just trying to balance out things a little more. So I'm guiding and teaching for about a third of the year, and then writing fiction and even some nonfiction articles for different magazines throughout the rest of the year. And now that my kids are a little older, I sure like being home and being able to go to the soccer games and events at school. And like a lot of guides in this town, Flagstaff's a real guide-heavy town. 1 in 3 people you run into is a guide.
No way. Is that an actual statistic?
It's probably pretty close. Or they're married to somebody who's a guide, And so, you spend 6 months, 8 months out of the year on the trail or in the canyon or backpacking, and that's fun. But I'm glad I've got the balance now where I can have my feet in both worlds.
Right on. And I just want you to know, Tony, it's not your body being 30 years older. Dirt and rocks are harder than they used to be 30 years ago. There's no scientific evidence to support that, but I am postulating it.
Sounds good to me. I'll blame it on my surroundings, not on me.
Because I, for one, have felt the same thing. I'm not quite to the 50s yet, but I have noticed that nights out sleeping on the ground, the pebbles in your back seem to poke more, and it's a little bit more. You get a little more sore when you wake up. It takes maybe like an extra 20, 30 minutes of movement to get where you could 20 years ago.
Yeah, one of my instructors brought a cowboy bedroll on a course recently, and he was showing me all these different features, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I got to get one of those. And he goes, dude, these have been out for like 100 years. You got to get with the times.
You just have to catch up with the 1870s. That's all. Right on. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I saw mentioned somewhere maybe in your biography, is that you had been some kind of advisor to the movie Into the Wild. And if folks don't recall, that came out, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or whatever. And it was a recounting of the guy that, I forget what do you remember what his name was?
It was Chris McCandless.
Chris McCandless, right. So he goes, he's kind of feeling out of place in his suburban or urban environment. He goes out to Alaska to try to survive on his own and kind of basically just find himself in the world. Great movie, sad ending, of course, but in what capacity did you help out on that movie?
So I took the actor Emile Hirsch out for the training on that. He came out here, and it was actually kind of a funny story because Sean Penn had called my house and spoken with me about setting this up, and I had no idea who this was because he only identified himself as Sean. And he's like, hey, I got a young actor here and want to take him out to prepare for this movie, and can you do it, and what are the dates? And so we set all this up, and he came out for a May course. It was just before they were going to be doing primary filming in the movie in Alaska. So when he came out, he was already gaunt because he had been losing massive amounts of weight and getting shredded on this crazy, whatever, 1,000-calorie a day diet so that they could film the death scenes in the movie first. And then they were going to work backwards from there. Okay. So anyway, I picked him up in town. We discussed what he wanted to do, and then we went out. We kind of did a knife-only course because he wanted to go out bare bones and just see what it was like to survive with minimum gear and sleep in a shelter he made himself and learn some axemanship skills and tracking and edible plants. So we just threw a lot of stuff at him during that weekend, and it was cold. It was in the 20s and 30s at night, and he had no body weight, so he was just freezing. And anyway, we spent a lot of time around the fire talking and telling stories, and he was asking me about some of my experiences going out solo for long periods of time, and so just kind of getting into the psychology as well of what goes on with somebody who's experienced a long-term physical and mental deprivation in the wilderness. And he was great. He picked up the skills very quickly, and just a real gentleman and real big-hearted guy. I kind of felt like he was playing himself in the movie, which I thought the movie did a great job of portraying things a little more than the book did myself. Okay.
I don't remember if I read the book, but the movie definitely, it was entertaining, and it also gave you, as an observer, a sense of kind of the connection that he initially felt, and then the challenges and trouble that came later.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and a big chunk of that, I think a third of that, was filmed in Arizona here.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And so I guess, there must be terrain in parts of Alaska that is similar to Arizona, or they just didn't care?
Well, he just wanted to get in the training, and he'd kind of already been around the country talking to the different people who had known Chris McCandless in real life. And so he just wanted to come here, get in the hands-on training before heading up to Alaska. And we went into the mountains. So we were at 7,000 feet, 7,500 feet in the pines and canyons, and somewhat similar in terms of the flora here and fauna. Of course, we didn't have any moose or grizzly bear.
Right. Which would be pretty nice, I think, for someone who is new to the experience. Following up on that, I wanted to find out, what's the longest that you have been out on a solo walkabout in the wilderness? And did you yourself experience these kinds of mental, physical strains, debilitations that you had to work with?
When I was younger, especially, first kind of getting into this field of study in my 20s and teens after high school, and then my 20s, I went on several 20 to 25 day solo trips. And this was back in Michigan, Upper Peninsula, and a few other areas, very rugged country. And the first time I went out, I said adios to my family, and I told my dad, I'm like, I'll be back in 3 weeks, and I'll be 20 pounds heavier, and be wearing buckskin. And he just kind of nodded. My dad had grown up during the Depression, and he knew all about foraging and butchering animals and fishing and stuff like that. And he just kind of nodded and waved goodbye. And that first trip, I went in way over my head with a lot of book knowledge and not a lot of hands-on skills. I ended up coming home 3 days later, bug bitten, cold, and hypothermic.
Oh, no.
I just thought, this is miserable. How did people do this? It cast such a negative experience upon me that I did not go into the outdoors for the rest of the summer.
Oh, no. Were you like, these books lied to me?
It's not that easy. And I realized I ended up working at a sporting goods store for the summer so I could vicariously live through other people going on trips as a solo year. And then I went on a solo backpacking trip in August along Lake Superior. And I took all this stuff. I had like the best sleeping bag and pack and foam pad and cooking stove. It was the exact opposite of what I was trying to accomplish originally, which was to connect more with the landscape. Here I was more like an astronaut wandering through a foreign landscape of 80 pounds.
Right. Yeah, you had all the most amazing gear.
Yeah, and so I went on that trip, and I just thought, how did people do this? How did our ancestors and the native peoples here and the mountain men, walk off and take care of themselves with just a knife and blanket. That's what I want to learn. And I realized that I needed to not try and jump back 20,000 years in one weekend, that I need to learn some skills first, master each skill set, fire, shelter, edible plants, and work on building my confidence up in those and know-how, and then ease myself into the outdoors. And once I realized that was the key, then I started taking some classes with different teachers in different schools. And once I had built up that kind of foundation of traditional skills, then a couple years later, about 2 years later, then I went out for these close to month-long trips by myself. And that's where the real fun and learning occurred, because then I had the skills down and it wasn't about suffering, it was about living.
And was it in one particular area that these longer excursions took place, or different areas?
I was doing these in Michigan. I was kind of dividing my time in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where I was working at the time. I ended up actually getting hired by Northern Michigan University to teach a primitive skills program for some of the traditional native peoples of the Upper Peninsula there. And then I was working out west as well, guiding some youth programs where we take kids out. Less than willing participants, I might add.
But did they, by the end, was it like one of those, movies in Hollywood where by the end, like everybody's on board and they love you as their teacher?
Well, it was close. It was a program where we had to take the kids' shoes and knives away at night.
Oh, goodness.
So a lot of these kids had had juvenile delinquent background, and it just came from a rough life. And so
I'm sorry to interrupt. I get the knives, but why the shoes?
So they couldn't run away at night.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so that was a very rewarding program, because the kids just, these were kids who came in with their heads hanging low and not a lot of confidence. And by the end, because they had to take care of themselves for the first time in their lives, making shelter, making fire, take care of their own needs, the attitude was just 180 degrees by week 3, and you just saw a tremendous surge in confidence and ability. And so that was a very rewarding program, but it was also just grueling, because as instructors, we'd lose 15 pounds in 3 weeks. Then we'd have off for 2 weeks, and we'd go have a bunch of pizza and beer and ice cream, put on all this weight, then go out again and lose the weight. And it was just this up and down. But I was like 21, 22, and I thought, man, I get paid to do this? I'll do this for free. This is fun.
Right. Until you have to sleep on that floor at the age of 50 plus, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of done with that.
All right. Well, I would love to, I've got about a list of 100 more questions, but I said we would try to keep it at around an hour. So welcome to the Rorschach Round, where we use ambiguously odd questions to delve deeper into the minds of these amazing authors. Let's get started. All right. So we're going to ask some weird questions and see if we can figure you out even more than, and to be honest, you don't seem to be the type of person that's trying to hide who you are. So I think we all have a good sense of it, but we're going to go even deeper. All right, here we go. Has anyone ever made you mad in real life that you subsequently tortured, maimed, or killed in a book?
Let's see. No, I don't think I've ever had to go that far, although there may be a few zombies in my books who had an untimely death connected with something in the past, but nothing that I can think of offhand.
Okay, all right. So there's something there, and I feel almost like you're asking us to dig deeper, but I won't do it. All right, next question here. If you could know the day and time that you are going to die, would you want to?
No, I'd rather just kind of live spontaneously and not have that deadline looming over me. I have enough deadlines with my editor and it's homework assignments that I don't need that as well.
I agree. Life as an adult, especially with kids in a family, does seem to be dominated by deadlines. So I'm with you on that one. All right. Next question. What is the worst job you've ever had?
Worst job. Let's see. That would have to be in my senior year of high school. My dad did not want me to pursue all this survival stuff and live in the outdoors, and he was kind of preparing me for a job with one of the big three companies, General Motors, who he worked for. And he got me this job working in this steel factory, and it was with around a lot of really rough dudes who had just, let's just say their breakfast was mostly liquid before they came in, and most of them were inebriated, operating these heavy machines.
Oh, no.
I just remember all these injuries happening. But anyway, so that kind of opened my eyes to, boy, I really don't want to do this kind of work. I'd rather spend my time in the outdoors. It was just grueling. And I remember this one guy had gotten a bunch of metal fragments sprayed in his face, and I walked into the bathroom to wash my hands, and there was a guy in there who was trying to use a little handheld magnet to remove these metal particles from the guy's cheek or something. And it was like, whoa, I don't need to see that. It's pretty grim. But it kind of shocked me to such a point where it's like, I am going to be the best guide out there and spend my time in the outdoors, not in a factory. And it really set me on my path.
Yeah. Having the alternate plan B that is nothing you want to take part in is pretty powerful impetus to be a success. Oh, I wanted to ask about that scenario, that steel foundry or mill. Did it have one of those signs, that you read 10 days since the last injury, but did that one never click over one?
Oh, geez. I honestly remember on an almost hourly basis, I would hear somebody groaning in pain or shrieking in pain as something happened with one of the machines. And it was, and your head just is on a swivel. It's like, what was that? What happened?
Well, I guess you're saying it's not unexpected when you mix copious amounts of booze and fiery hot lava liquid steel and then large moving machinery.
Oof, yeah, in the pre-OSHA days.
Right. OSHA was established because of the place you worked. All right. Next question here. What would if you were to have an autobiography at some point before you pass, what would it be called?
Let's see. Well, one of the things that I'm really invested in and spend most of my free time in is in dog rescue. And so we do a lot of rescue out on the Navajo reservation, bringing in stray pups and dogs. In fact, we have 3 stray pups right now. And so that's kind of where my heart's at. And I guess if I had to have some kind of thing on my tombstone, it might be connected with, he fed a lot of dogs in his lifetime or something like that.
I like it. And it would be up to the reader of the gravestone to assume that it wasn't, you meant with food and not your body. And that's how you went out.
Yeah, right.
His final offering. All right. So I think we may know the answer to this next and last Rorschach Round question, just from your comments there, but we'll ask it anyway. If you could be one animal in imagination land for whatever reason, what would you be and why?
Well, probably in that case, I'd have to switch gears here from dogs to cats, because I have to agree with Leonardo da Vinci's saying that cats are nature's masterpiece. Just this sleek, beautiful creature that can go anywhere, and I'd sure like to have that physical ability to be able to climb trees and bound up cliffs and move around at night and see what's out there. And I just think cats are cool. Plus, I've been stalked by a few mountain lions in the backcountry, and always wondering what's going on from their perspective.
Were you wondering it while you were being stalked, or just in retrospect?
No, in retrospect, coming back and then, walking into a camp one night, and then the next night, next morning as we were leaving, I see all these cougar tracks inside of my tracks as he was following me down the canyon the previous night. So,
man, yeah, that's got to send some the hairs on your back of your neck spiking up.
Yeah.
Have you, so we're through with Rorschach Round. We're very close to the end, but that brought up another question I don't think we can skip. Have you had any sort of encounters with wildlife with so much experience out in nature?
It's mostly been the creepy crawlies, the rats, the snakes, the scorpions. I just cannot stand scorpions. Maybe it's from watching Aliens too much, but it's all the creepy crawling, all those legs and the tail. Just wears on my psyche. So having encounters with scorpions, been stung plenty of times by them. I really can't stand the little creepy crawlies, but you do the best you can. It just goes with being outside here in the Southwest. But yeah, I've had close encounters with coyotes and bobcats and things like that. Some real close face-to-face encounters with black bears, and I'd rather not have that happen again. It was mostly just element of surprise coming up a canyon, and there's one drinking from a water hole up on the rise, and I don't see him, and he doesn't see me until we're too close, and things like that. But I have to be honest, I think it's mostly scary encounters with the shady two-legged types that
right.
more than anything else, because it's just there's sometimes strange people in the backcountry, and your trails will cross once in a while.
Yeah, it sounded like you took one of those people out on that just you and he out at the river's edge there.
Right, a one and only time.
Right on. Well, Tony, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. But before we go, can you let us know, is there any upcoming projects that readers and fans should know about?
Just again, working on, as you mentioned, the third book in the Emergence series, which will be out in mid-February, and I'm kind of just really delving into that series this year. And then I'll just have a new book on survival. This will be kind of bare bones survival, what to do if you're separated from your group, your hunting party, your gear, and you just have what's on you and in your pockets. So we'll be looking at some of the real simplistic, pragmatic skills of how to take care of yourself and get through a cold night. So those are kind of the big projects on the platter for this year.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure and get that in the show notes. And if people want to find out more about you and what you do, where are the best places that they should look?
JTSawyer.com is my website, and all my books are listed under that as well on Amazon, JT Sawyer. And then apathways.com is the site for my survival school, as well as my nonfiction books on self-reliance and bushcraft, and it's just apathways.com.
Awesome. Okay, we'll get that in the show notes as well. And everyone out there listening, definitely check out. I have just become a recent fan of his writing, but have been a fan of the survival courses for several years now, and they're both amazing. So if you get the chance to, the book is easier to get to, of course, check that out. But if you get the chance and he's got one of those courses open, man, don't hesitate if you have the time, money, and inclination, because it is a really awesome learning experience. And I think that is it. Tony, just wanted to say thank you again so much. It's been a real pleasure and honor, and just thanks for coming on the show.
William, thank you. It's been a real fun time here talking to you again, and we'll have to do it again around the wood smoke of a good campfire sometime.
I would absolutely love that. I'm gonna sit down with Life and have a little discussion, and then make it happen. So I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. It was an absolute pleasure getting to chat with Tony. I wish teleportation existed as a functional technology, and not one that would scramble your molecules so that you went in as yourself and you came out looking like a torn up pizza. It's kind of gross to think about, right? No, but anyway, Star Trek style teleportation, because I would guaranteed be teleporting myself out to Flagstaff and taking more of Tony's courses for as long as they are available. And I had money I could give him. Tony, I want to give you my money to to enjoy and learn at your courses. It's true. And if anyone else out there, I recommended it at the end of the interview, but go check him out. He's just amazing in person. And back to kind of more of the point of this show, the Emergence series of books, which is the series that I've been getting into, is a lot of fun. So you should check that out as well. So all of the links that Tony mentioned to both his author website and Ancient Pathways and the new book that he's coming out, third in the series of the Emergence series, is listed in the show notes, and that can be found at www.williamoday.com/ the number of the episode, this one being 15, number 15. Oh, yes. And of course, as mentioned at the top of the show, there will be a photo, the proof of the spoon that I made, that I carved out during that 3-day knife-only course with Tony outside of Flagstaff. Actually, I have to go wash it because it has a bunch of crusty cheese stuff on it, and I want to present it looking nice, you know? But anyway, there will be there. And you know what? Also, I just remembered I still have not tried out the best margarita in the universe. So I'm going to not say again that I'll do it next week, because who knows, maybe I'm not feeling like drinking a margarita in the next week, but I have it there in a back drawer in my mind somewhere. And so I will definitely get to that at some point. And when I do, I will bring that review onto the show, because Russell told me in not so many words that it's just amazing that, one, it's probably too potent, but two, it's the most delicious thing you can run across if you're into that kind of thing. And I am into that kind of thing on occasion. So I'm going to give it a try. That's it for today. If you would like to be sure to never miss a show and always have them immediately available on your device of choice, you can subscribe by going to www.williamoday.com/iTunes. And if you enjoyed the show, I would so appreciate a rating and review on iTunes. They both help with store visibility, and they also let other listeners know if this show is something that they might be interested in checking out. And I've made it easy to access both of those by going to the same link on my website, www.williamoday.com/iTunes. That will have a link there that you can jump over to either subscribe and or maybe all three, rate and review the show. So I would so appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's it for now. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the OMG Book Show. You can find out more at www.williamoday.com.